join me in welcoming Mike Walsh, and he'll be speaking with us about advancing the rule of law.
All right. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Ken. Very nice, warm introduction, and it's such a pleasure to be here in North Carolina. I love coming down here. One of the reasons I love coming down here is the weather. Right? It's like almost perfect out there. Nice blue skies, no interruptions. Quite a contrast from what I experienced in New York earlier this morning when I was supposed to come down here. And I had a flight that was scheduled for 12:30. Thunderstorms came up. That got canceled. Then I got on another flight. That got delayed. So I spent most of the day either in the airport or on the tarmac. And I arrived here just about 15, 20 minutes ago. So perfect timing, just in time. But it's great to be with you guys here. I'm going to go through a little bit about LexisNexis and the company, but more importantly about our mission, which is to advance the rule of law around the globe, and the idea that together as actors, universities, students, law firms, institutions can actually have transformational impact on the world. And as part of that, I'm going to go through what do we mean when we talk about the rule of law? What's its definition? Why is it important? How does it have impact? And what can we do together to advance it? Sound good? Yeah? Okay, let's start with a little bit about LexisNexis, and importantly, the partnership that we have with NC State, which we value greatly. I don't know if you guys know, but we've actually been a partner here since 2014, which is when we first opened up our doors on campus here. And we are proud to have launched the Innovation Studio that was referred to, where we worked together on innovations. We met many of the students through our hackathons, usually on the weekends, and actually we're going to have the 5 winners from the October hackathon are going to come up to meet with me and my team in New York City, and we're going to do a little Shark Tank-like experience with them, so that should be a lot of fun. We're the largest employer, actually, on the campus with about 700. Correct me, is that correct? Yeah, the largest? Yeah. So we are the largest employer on the campus. And we are really proud to be part of the Triangle community. And we've been a long-term sponsor of the Ironman, and we've done the American Heart Association walk recently. So we think it's very important for us to be involved there. Those are all key parts of our culture in the company. A little bit of overview of our business. We have about 10,000 employees around the world, and they really are spread out all around the globe. We operate in about 130 countries. About 2/3 of our employees are here in the US, and the balance are spread out around the rest of the world. We have about 2.2 billion in annual revenues and 3 petabytes of legal and news data. By reference, that's about 150 times the size of Wikipedia, just to put it in context of sort of the size and scale of the information and data that we like to play around with. We're a leading provider of legal, regulatory information and analytics that we help combine with technology to solve customer problems. And we talk about helping improve customer outcomes, and if we can improve our customers' lives and increasingly their economics, that's actually what returns those customers to us. But underlying what we do, fundamentally, is our mission to advance the rule of law around the world. And everything we do, every time we put out a case, every time we put out a technology tool that helps build out the legal infrastructure around the world, we're helping with that mission. And that's mainly what I'm going to talk about today. So first, what is the rule of law? How do we define it? Lots of different organizations will define it. You hear about it in the news, you see it in the papers, you see comments on it by politicians. A lot of people talk about rule of law. And if you look at actually all the definitions of the rule of law, UN puts out a definition, government institutions put out a definition. If you look at that and boil it down to the components of the rule of law are largely similar. So I've looked at them all, and they almost all contain elements of these components. First, everybody's equal under the law. Everyone gets equal treatment regardless of where they come from, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Second, you need a strong and independent judiciary that is and acts as a check on executive and other power. Third, you need accessible legal remedy, or remedy that's available on a widespread basis, and people have the ability to access it so that they have an ability to get justice when they need it. And fourth, there's transparency of the law, that laws are clear and visible and people can see it and understand it, and then therefore have a basis on which to achieve access to legal remedy. And so in general, the stronger any one of these components and the stronger the four of them together, the stronger the rule of law in any particular state, any particular country, or jurisdiction. So that's the definition of rule of law. Now, how do you measure rule of law? Well, the best place that I've seen that we've been able to find that systematically measures the rule of law is an organization called the World Justice Project. And this is a nonprofit organization, and it created something called the Rule of Law Index. And the Rule of Law Index measures the degree of rule of law in many, many countries around the world. And what it does is it does its work in 113 countries. And it looks at 44 indicators in 8 categories. And they balance survey work with actual first-hand research where they go out and talk to about 110,000 citizens across all these countries to measure different components of the rule of law. And the components are largely subsets of the 4 component definitions that I showed you. So they go out and they do this work to assess how different countries score in the rule of law and how strong they are. And this chart shows you the results of the 2016 scores and the rankings. And what they do is they put it on an index from 0 to 100, or 0 to 1.0. And in 2016, Denmark actually scored at the top of the list. It was ranked at 0.89 out of 1, or 89 points out of 100. And Venezuela ranked last, and it was 0.28. And many of you probably read about a number of the political and civil problems that are quite graphic in Venezuela. The United States came in 18, towards the top of the list, but not number 1. Now we asked ourselves, well, what's the relationship between rule of law and things that are associated with good economies and good societies? So we asked ourselves, what's the relationship between rule of law and economic development? So what we did is we did a little bit of work and plotted out all the different countries on an index. So the bottom of the chart, the rule of law index, just shows you where each of those dots is where each country's plotted out. And on the left, we plotted out GDP per capita, gross domestic product per capita, a measure of sort of the economic wealth in a society per person. And what you can see, generally, is that the stronger rule of law in the countries, the stronger the economies, as reflected by GDP per capita. Now, it's not a perfect relationship. These things never have a perfect relationship, but you can see a reasonably close correlation between the two. So, rule of law is associated generally with higher levels of economic development. And then we said to ourselves, well, what do the countries look like that are plotted there? So as you can imagine, on the bottom part of the chart, the lower left-hand side, you see countries like Afghanistan, Cambodia, Pakistan. These are countries that are often subject to civil rights abuses. Many of them are war-torn. And on the upper right, you see many of the advanced industrialized European countries and some Asian countries like you see Japan up there and Singapore. Probably not all that surprising. Here, interestingly, is where the U.S. and China stack up. So you can see the U.S. scores much higher on the rule of law index than China, and also much higher in GDP per capita. And there, you read a lot about competitive dynamics with China and the U.S. and the fact that Chinese growth rate has been at 7%, now it's sort of gradually coming down a little bit compared to the U.S., which has been more around in sort of the 2% range. And so people tend to talk about China's economy as growing much faster, but if you put it in the context of GDP per capita, or actually wealth per person, what you can see is today, actually, the U.S. is about 7 times the GDP per capita of China. Now, China's trying to get up that curve, And I would posit to you that whether and how fast it can move up that curve and whether it can continue to progress and move up into a GDP per capita that approximates what you see in the US and Europe, in part, in a significant part, depends on whether and how it can address rule of law. And that is something you hear being talked about in China. So then we said to ourselves, well, all right, there's a relationship between economic development and rule of law, but what about other indicators in society? So we looked at different correlations. We just sort of gathered up data sources that we could find from publicly available data about these countries, and we plotted it up. We're a data company, right? So we have to look at data. Nothing happens unless it's looked at with data. And what we found is that higher rule of law on the bottom, higher rule of law index, is associated with lower child mortality. So as rule of law increases, child mortality tends to drop. Higher rule of law, lower levels of homicide. Higher rule of law, lower levels of corruption. Higher rule of law, higher life expectancy. Right? Again, none of the correlations are exactly perfect, but you can see a fairly clear associated relationship between the rule of law and economic development and societal indicators. And what that data shows is probably what most people just know or feel intuitively, which is that if a society doesn't have a clear standard of rule of law, if there isn't an ability to have clear and safe contractual commitments, protection of intellectual property, and protection against civil rights abuses, countries have a hard time developing both economically and with social indicators. So the data just sort of bears out what you would probably just guess naturally. So that's a bit about what is the rule of law. And it's a bit about why is it important. It's important because it's associated with positive benefits in society. So then we ask ourselves, all right, well, how do we actually improve the rule of law? And what can we do to advance the rule of law? And for us, for LexisNexis, this is at the core of what we do every day. And this is what shapes our mission. And we actually work on moving each one of those components of the rule of law. And I'll give some illustrations about some of the work that we do and some of the work that others do around that. So first of all, one of the components is equality under the law. Remember the four components, right? We're under equality. And one of the things that we've done that helps support equality under the law is something called the Eyewitness to Atrocities app. And we partnered with an organization called the International Bar Association to develop and put this app out. And it's the first app that actually allows you to safeguard, store, and lock in images that can be used in a court of law. Many of you may remember that sort of dramatic moment when, after the Syrian chemical attack, Nikki Haley, UN ambassador, stood before the UN, and she made a very, very strong plea and held up pictures, graphical images of children that have been impacted by that attack and urged nations not to turn a blind eye. You remember that scene? But what you might not know about that is that most of the images that she held up can't actually be used in a court of law because their authenticity can't be verified. So the Eyewitness app changes that, and it creates a mechanism that date stamps and creates an authenticity mark that allows these images to be entered into a court of law. And it's now available in about 130 countries around the world, and the downloads are growing every day. Independent judiciary. How do you promote independent judiciary, and what can we do as an organization, as a company, to drive independent judiciary? So one thing we do is we provide legal materials and training to courts in about 100 countries to strengthen the skills and training of the judges in the court system. This is a picture from, we recently made the laws of Rwanda available online for the first time, and that has been a key enabler of legal reform as that country continues to heal from the 1994 genocide. Accessible legal remedy. One of the areas that we've focused on here is human trafficking. And we know that about 21 million people are victims of human trafficking around the world. And anybody who's stared into the eyes of one of these victims can only imagine the horrors that they have undergone. And for us, we concentrated our efforts on working with attorneys general across the country. And we helped shape model laws and help get those laws enacted and passed and provided support for that to happen. And you can see some of the results that have occurred working in partnership with attorney generals across the world. The number of laws, state laws, that are ranked as excellent by Polaris, which is a non-government entity that does this, that ranks laws, has gone up from 11 in 2011 to 43 in 2017. Now, there's still a lot more work to be done, but there's been good, strong progress in this area over the last 6 years. Transparency of laws, right? Laws must be clear, they must be transparent. And as I mentioned, we have a database that provides transparency into the laws in 130 countries, and that database is 150 times the size of Wikipedia. By the way, it's doubling every 3 years, just to give you a size of sort of a sense of the scope and the rapidity with which this is moving. And our mission is to make the world's laws available and transparent to everybody. And we recently were working in the Maldives. Rough assignment, right? I guess nobody here would really complain about being sent out to work in the Maldives for an assignment. And so we worked to help the Maldives consolidate and publish their laws. And this is the first time that it happened in the Maldives. And that alone, by the way, can be transformative in a society. And in the course of doing that, one of our team members discovered that their local language didn't have a word for as amended, which is critical if you're going to publish and consolidate and then act on laws. You have to know if the law was amended or not. So we helped the country develop a word for as amended called Isla. And we stood proudly in Parliament the day that that was enacted. In Myanmar, we worked on constitutional reform, and we actually sponsored and held the first seminar for their lawyers on constitutional reform. And we watched that day in the seminar as the mood went from tentative to empowered. A tremendously empowering impact. China and Saudi Arabia, you might think, well, it's sort of puzzling. Why are those countries on the list there? And they're not democracies. Well, our belief is that helping create transparency in the law is a key step in any society on that journey into rule of law. And so we're actually working with both China and Saudi Arabia in building out and helping them create transparency into a legal system. So our mission is to continue to extend and make the world's laws available to everybody. And we're going to continue to expand our resources there until everybody in the world has clear and visible connection to and transparency into the laws. And we're using technology to extend that. And we are not just publishing laws, but we're making accessibility much easier, and we're making the ability to get legal answers much faster. And these are just some of the areas of investment that we have made to help extend transparency of the law through technology investments. So we've done data-driven decision-making, invested significantly in skills development, particularly around artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. We have a LexisNexis accelerator that's cultivating startups. We're working with agile methodologies, artificial intelligence, and largely in the cloud. Together, we've invested about $1.2 billion in these areas to really make a push to help us accelerate the technology and our ability to create transparency through technology. Here's one of the things we're working on right now, which is legal answers. So today, we actually can answer basic legal questions electronically. So if you have a basic legal question like, what is a precedent for dog bites? You can either enter that into our system, or you can actually ask Alexa in production mode, and it will tell you. Now, that's a basic legal question. But what we're working on right now is to move up the value chain, right? Increasingly around more business-like questions. How much will it cost to litigate? And ultimately, we want to have complex questions so that we can really make more efficient, streamline, and free up time for lawyers to provide human judgment rather than working just through basic question and answer. And we're going to continue to do this work until we really can answer just about every legal question. And by the way, a lot of this work is being done right on campus here by some of the 700 people that are working on, in the organization here. We're also buying companies that do this. And so these are just a few examples of companies that we've acquired over the last few years that have expertise in AI and machine learning that are helping us build out this capability and this skill set so we can take this to the next level. One of them is Lex Mach. They're based in Silicon Valley. And Lex Mach helps you actually predict how opposing counsel or judges are going to behave through data-driven analytics. IntelliGeyes, which is based in Virginia, helps you to automate pieces of a transaction. So increasingly, we're taking the transactional workflow that an attorney does and automating that to make it easier and more efficient. And Ravel is another San Francisco-based company. And what they do is they help litigators automatically formulate arguments. And actually, we were just talking about that. This is some of the work that we do there. So those are just some examples. There are others, too. We're also incubating startups. We have an accelerator program to help startups get off the ground, to help them build scalable and sustainable businesses that are helping to drive the mission that we have of advancing the rule of law in one way or another. And the accelerator is actually launched out of our Silicon Valley shop. It's run out of the company we acquired called Lex Mach, which is right in Silicon Valley. And we've added a bunch of startups in Silicon Valley. We've added startups in the Triangle area. We just added these two here. So if you go by our offices, you actually might see people from these startups actually wandering through the offices, because one of the things we do is we provide mentoring and coaching, but we also provide office space for people to come and work in. And that's also a big benefit for us too, because it helps us just stay current with any new cutting edge thing that somebody's doing. We can see what they're doing, and maybe we can adopt it or use it or leverage it some way. But we know that really to move the needle on the rule of law, it's not just about what we do internally, but the biggest impact we can have is actually partnering with others. Just like that example I gave you with the Attorney General, where we worked on human trafficking laws. And one of the things we did a couple of years ago is we partnered with the United Nations. This is Ban Ki-moon, the head of the UN at that time. And he was, we did an event together to really shine a spotlight on the rule of law. And we launched something at that event called Business for the Rule of Law. And what Business for the Rule of Law is, it's a framework for how businesses can conduct themselves. Businesses spend a lot of money, we hire a lot of people, and the way we conduct ourselves says a lot about the rule of law and how we conduct rule of law around the world. So we provided some guidelines and framework through the UN that helped support the rule of law, that provided clear guidelines around accountability, certainty in the law, promoting equality, promoting human rights and protecting human rights, and supporting access to justice. And these were guidelines that general counsels can use with their companies to ensure that companies are adhering to the right level of standards. So that's about how we can move the rule of law. And some examples of actions we can do to promote equality and promote transparency and create some guidelines. But what does it really mean? What's the impact of it? We asked ourselves that question, and we struggled with this question for a little while. And being a data company, well, we had to look at the data. And we took some of that modeling I showed you that showed the correlation between the rule of law and economic development and social indicators. And we said to ourselves, well, what's the impact if together, by moving the needle with our partners, we can shift the rule of law and improve it by 1%. If we can improve the rule of law index worldwide by 1%, what would be the impact statistically between that and the various indicators that we looked at? And so statistically, based on the correlations we showed, if you move the index by 1%, GDP per capita goes up worldwide by about $676, which is actually, by the way, more than the GDP per capita in some places. Homicides decrease by about 0.2 per 100,000. Child mortality rates increase by about 1 per 1,000, and average life expectancy increases by about 0.2 years. That's an impact. That's a positive impact. Then we said to ourselves, well, what is the impact if we can move the rule of law index by 10% and do that on a global basis? And by the way, all these figures, these are on a tool that our team developed. So you can play around with this tool. It's on our website, and scroll back and forth to just see the various correlations. But I'll show you at 10%. So the 1% on the bottom goes to 10% on the tool. And what does that mean? That means that GDP per capita statistically would go up by $7,000 per person. And homicides would decrease by 1 per 1,000. Child mortality rates, by the way, that's an improvement of about 30%. Child mortality rates would decrease by 7.9 per 1,000. And average life expectancy would increase by about 2.3 years. So that translates into millions of children's lives being saved, millions of people, fewer victims of homicides, and improved life expectancy. So this is a future that we think is worth pursuing. And this is in part why we're so motivated to advance this mission, because we understand why it's important, we understand how we can impact it, and we understand the positive impact that it can have on the world. So, if a nation's laws are muddy, if there isn't a strong independent judiciary, if the laws are not clear and transparent, citizens of those nations will suffer, and then we're all at risk. That's why we feel very, very privileged and honored to work in a company that truly has a higher purpose, and that purpose for us is to advance the rule of law. So I would encourage you to join us in this mission. And if you're interested in the Business for Rule of Law framework that I discussed and shared with you, that we jointly rolled out with the UN and with Ban Ki-moon, you can find that on the LexisNexis.com website. You can download that and take a look at that. If you want to play around with the Rule of Law Impact Tracker and see the different data correlations and get more information about the data and where it came from and how we looked at it, you can also go to LexisNexis.com and look for the Rule of Law Impact Tracker. And importantly, if you're interested in having a dialogue with us about joining us in this mission, we would be honored and thrilled to have that discussion with you. And you can go to our LexisNexis.com website to the U.S. Careers section there. And I think we already have one recruit over here, the guy who answered the trivia question, right? If he knows the answer to that, I'm sure you can solve advancing the rule of law for us. So that's all I wanted to share with you. And let me pause and see if there's any questions.
All right, so if you have any questions, if you'll raise your hand and we'll try to get a microphone to you, that way we can capture the question on video. So I think they're all on the other side.
You'll be a video star.
Yes, I was interested in the beginning of your presentation, we went over several charts that demonstrated a strong correlation between rule of law, especially GDP. Would you say that there is a causal relationship between rule of law and increase in GDP?
So, it's hard to say if there's a real causal relationship or not. Clearly, they're associated there. And that's, I think, about all we can conclude. We're not social scientists. We're business people. And what we can see is that what we're doing and the rule of law is associated with good things. And so that makes us motivated.
Cool, thank you.
Hi. So my question was, or it was really interesting when you mentioned like the third world countries, especially that advancing the rule of law helps in. And I was wondering if, using technology solely to advance the rule of law would ever like further leave behind those countries, or like if there were problems that you guys encountered like getting technology into those areas, or like how that worked.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think you can advance interests and help with technology and without technology, and we do both, right? So we're both on the ground helping write constitutions. We're helping with constitutional reform conventions. We're providing legal materials to help courts and judges, but we're also then helping move some of the countries up the technology curve, because technology ultimately makes transparency and visibility more accessible and cheaper across the board. And so if we can bring that and we can leverage that, then we can extend the range at which we can operate and we can reach. So I do see an opportunity for both.
So I wanted to ask you actually a bit more about accessibility, because it seems like there's a couple of dimensions there. One of them is, can people actually get to a court? Can they get a lawyer, and so on? But then there's other questions of, the complexity of the law, right? How much effort does it take to actually determine the answer to any given question? Have you done any work on looking at legal complexity, or what, economic legal theorists look at the consequences of various legal alternatives in terms of who pays the cost and externalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, by the way, of course, you'd have to have a professor ask a question like that, right? I think that, in general, as you make things less complex, as you make them easier to do, you extend the reach at which people can actually access justice, get information, get appropriate legal advice, et cetera. That's sort of a concept in theory, right? But we've seen that play itself out. We've seen that in terms of the impact that technology's had, in terms of the greater reach of accessibility to courts. Accessibility to courts today is far greater than it ever has been. It's not where we want it to be, and as you can see, in the US, it's actually not the best in the world, but it's far greater than it's been, and a part of that story certainly has been electronic docketing, electronic discovery tools, the ability for people. We have prison kiosks, for example, where we actually have, in prisons, we have access to our databases for free. And so it just helps create visibility through technology. Now, none of that would have been available, before technology. Each of those things boils down complexity. Every time you boil down complexity, in theory, you get lower costs, and you therefore extend to greater numbers of people. Let's see who asks the harder questions, the teachers or the students? I'll bet it's the students, actually.
My question is about the, you mentioned like Alexa-like or,
Yeah.
Google Home-like AI to help answer legal questions.
Yeah.
I know a big problem with human legal advice is, having to say disclaim like, this is not a paid law service, used with it. Do you have that sort of legal problem with offering like AI-based legal advice or something
So
like that?
we don't, because we offer this advice to lawyers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we're providing help for the lawyer and the lawyer answering the question. So we're not providing that advice directly to the end customer or the consumer legal services. We're providing it directly to the lawyer, and the lawyer then applies their judgment. Now, the question I think really will become over time, where does that line blend? And as far as we can see, sort of in the near term, we don't see ever crossing over that boundary, sort of over the sort of 5 to 10 year horizon. But things are gonna develop, and we'll probably have to grapple with tough issues like that over time. But it's interesting. I was talking about this question just the other day with somebody who said, well, it's kind of like on the Starship Enterprise. The computer can answer any questions, right? And it can sort of tell you anything. But there actually are still lawyers in the 25th century. When is Star Trek? What century is it? 24th? Right. Yeah, there's still lawyers on board there, right?
Hi, I was wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit to the tension between being a business and attempting to accomplish what is presumed to be an ethical goal, especially in places where the money might not necessarily be on the side of improving rule of law.
Yeah, yeah. So there is a tension there. I wouldn't say that there's a conflict in the sense of, there's no case I'm aware of where the decision is to do something unethical or ethical. The decision is usually where you're going to get your biggest bang for your, the biggest return for your investment, right? And so almost everything that we do gets an ethical return for its investment, because what we're doing is, as a commercial business, is advancing the rule of law. That there's also a lot of other problems that we're not necessarily solving. The world's a big place, right? There's a lot of people who are involved in advancing the rule of law. There's a lot of partners out there, and we can't solve everything. And we're not going to go after everything because we are a commercial business. So there are sort of, tensions associated with where do we put our return. And because we are a business, we put return where we're going to get a economic payoff, which then allows us to expand our resources and move into other places, and that's what creates a sustainable opportunity. We do work with many, many other partners, helping them. We work with NGOs, we work with nonprofit organizations around the world. We work with the United Nations to help advance areas where we might not be able to get an economic return in doing that. Great question. Yeah. One minute. Wait for the microphone so that we can capture it on video. You want to be a video star here in this.
Thank you, sir. I have a question about your partnership with United Nations. Do you have an office also in Den Haag, International Court of Justice in the Netherlands, or in New York?
Do we have an office in the?
Yes, because you have office here on campus.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But you have a partnership.
Yes, we have an office. We have an office in New York. It's actually
in United Nations.
Right next to the United Nations. Maybe I don't know, 10 blocks,
10
something
blocks.
like that. 10 blocks maybe away. We meet with them all the time. Our head of communications over here, Stephanie Samis, who is with me, actually sits on committees with them all the time, as well as our general counsel, and we work together on this initiative that we started. So we're a co-founder of it. That doesn't mean we make all the decisions. We do that in conjunction with the steering committee that we have, and we work in lockstep with the UN.
How many years?
What's that?
How many years?
What is it, 3 years now? 5 years. 5, wow, boy, time flies. 5 years now.
And
Yeah.
what's about your partnership with International Court of Justice in the Netherlands, Den Haag?
What does it say?
Do you have also office in the Netherlands, Den Haag?
We don't have an
International Court
office
of
in the
Justice?
Court of Justice, no, but we work with them. We work with them closely.
Mhm. Thank you.
Does advancing the rule of law help with the sustainable development goals of the United Nations and to help achieve them?
Yes, it does. As a matter of fact, it's a key component of the Sustainable Development Goals. That umbrella created a framework, and rule of law is a part of the framework that helps support Sustainable Development Goals. So it's completely consistent with that framework. I do believe that rule of law explicitly at the end is not actually explicitly called out in the Sustainable Development Goals. To be honest, there was some conflict associated with the precise language around that, and in part that's why sort of separate initiative that rolls up into the framework was important for the United Nations to roll out.
Just maybe a more pragmatic question. What types of majors would want to work for your company? There are a few things that stand out already: the web development, data management, system management, lawyers.
Yes,
statisticians?
yes, and yes.
Okay.
Yes. No, great question.
Am I missing something?
So we have more jobs than we can fill. Let's just start there, right? We have, and actually we have our, somebody who used to run our talent development program right here, Tiffany Lewis, with us, right? So everybody could talk to her. But we have job postings. We have more than we can fill. We have huge demand for people with AI, machine learning, computer science, engineering backgrounds. We have big demand for computational linguists. We have big demand for people who have experience in graphic design, web design, ease of use, those areas. But we also have lots of other opportunities too. I mean, we're a large business. We have 10,000 people. We have functional, every functional area: finance, HR, sales, marketing, and we hire people in all those areas. And we hire people in all those areas on this campus here. But the biggest area of demand that we have is squarely in computer science, engineering, AI, machine learning. Is that fair, Tiffany?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add to that? Yeah.
We're on campus right now, and we're hiring for interns and also full-time positions for this.
Yeah. You want to talk about the intern program?
Sure. We actually.
Oh, I think we need a microphone over here for Tiffany. Yeah.
So we're really this year we had 10 interns in our office just across the way. All of them were mostly in the technology space. We actually also had an HR intern who was fabulous, who helped with the campus recruiting. But we actually have made offers to all of our interns, which was really important to us because it speaks to our desire to really build kind of a long, sustaining relationship with the campus. It also helped that the students we had were really high quality, and so it was really easy to get them to come back. And so we are growing our office over there, which is the only constraint we have on hiring more. We want to make sure we kind of build the infrastructure of training and development and career progression at the same time as we're bringing people in. So we kind of have a goal to just increase the number of people that we're hiring through campus every year, just making sure that there's that balance.
5 years ago, we had about 20 or 30 people in this area. Now we have 700. That just gives you, and we're continuing to grow.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, well, we have to get you the mic.
So what exactly has, what's been your experience with countries that may not necessarily want to advance the rule of law? For example, China might be very adamant against increasing transparency, and other countries might be adamant against advancing other aspects of the rule of law.
Yeah, great question. So I touched on a little bit of that in the presentation where I talked about working with both China and Saudi Arabia, and it's a bit of an interesting area. Because we are approached by both, and both are actually interested in building out a database, a legal database, to make visible the laws that they have. And our point of view is that that's an important step in any country. We're not a political organization. We don't take sides or stands. We do help countries create infrastructure with the belief that transparency into what exists can only be a good thing. So we're actually working together with the government in China to build out a vast, actually historic database. There are parts of it have already actually launched. And we're a little earlier stage in Saudi Arabia just because things, they can take a while. But we've been in dialogue with leaders there for a number of years.
As far as your work in the U.S. goes, how has LexisNexis impacted or come across the racial bias in our own country, like in our criminal justice system?
How do we address or help?
Is that something you come across?
So, any issue that relates to human rights or civil rights is something that can be moved or impacted by the law. And so we don't take any particular position politically. What we do is we help create a legal infrastructure that allows actors to work out and overcome issues over time. So we're not going to solve the whole problem, but we're going to be a key part of providing an infrastructure of justice that people can operate on. And our mission is to do that efficiently and make it accessible and easy to use and effective so that people can rely on that.
Hi, so during your presentation, you mentioned that the US was number 18 on the index. What are some of the things that the first 17 countries are doing better, or what are some of the things that we can learn from them?
Yeah. Some of the countries ahead of us have higher scores on accessibility of the courts. So in the US, there are often backlogs in the courts, getting access to justice through the courts, so we tend to score a little lower on accessibility of justice than many other countries do. There's been some countries actually score higher on one of the subcomponents of transparency is around freedom of the press. Some of the countries actually are considered to have more open press than we do. So there's a few of those indicators, but the main driver is around accessibility to justice.
So first, thank you for coming tonight. You're a data company, and you talk about the huge investment in artificial intelligence. And the question I have, and the interesting thing I've not heard tonight is anything around security. So from your perspective, what is the cybersecurity threat in this particular domain?
Yeah, so it's something we take very seriously, right? There's no CEO that runs any data business that doesn't have security up there on the top list of their concerns. So we've got major investments in it. We have very, very smart people who look at it. We're constantly paranoid that we could have a breach or that somebody could get through. We have layers and layers of protection, but at the end of the day, nobody's really safe. So it's something we take extremely seriously. We invest a lot in security. We hire people. We want the smartest people who are interested in security to come and work for us. We have teams who try to hack into ourselves internally. We do drills around it. We take it extremely seriously. Okay. It looks like we have just about, that was a great set of questions, by the way. Better than the questions I get in my own company. So I got to say, we got a smart group of people. Thank you. Thank you.